My name is Evelyn Carter. If anyone is still willing to listen, I suppose I should begin not with who I was in the prime of my life, but with who I became when the world no longer noticed me. I am 78 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment that has grown too quiet, too still, too heavy with silence. Once upon a time, this place echoed with the sound of laughter, footsteps, arguments, and life. Now, it is only me, and the steady ticking of a clock that feels more like a countdown than a comfort. The walls hold memories I sometimes wish I could scrape away. Photographs, once proudly framed, now lean crooked on shelves collecting dust. In one picture, I am holding Daniel on his 5th birthday, his cake collapsing, because he could not wait to blow the candles. In another, Grace, my only daughter, is in her school play costume, her eyes bright, her smile wide. And then, there is Michael, the youngest, who once swore he would never leave me, clutching my arm with the stubbornness of a boy who feared the dark. They are grown now, respectable, successful, busy, too busy for their mother. I am not bitter, at least that is what I tell myself. Perhaps I failed them somehow, perhaps I smothered them, or perhaps I asked for too much when all I ever wanted was to be remembered, to be loved the way I loved them. But days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and still, no one comes. My phone sits by my bed, heavy with silence, the screen blank. No calls, no messages, nothing. I have grown used to the hollow routine. Heating tea for one, folding laundry that never truly piles up, and speaking aloud only to myself. The loneliness aches more than age does. It seeps into the bones, colder than winter, sharper than hunger. Sometimes I wonder if this is how the body begins to surrender. Not with illness, but with absence, with neglect. It was last night, as the shadows stretched long across the floor, that the thought settled on me with weight I could not shake. I might die here, and no one would know. Not Daniel. Not Grace. Not Michael. Days could pass, maybe even weeks, before anyone discovered that the woman who gave them everything had left the world quietly, alone. That fear pushed me to do something I never imagined I would. I picked up my phone, this old, scratched device that seemed useless without their voices, and I pressed record. I stared at the little red dot on the screen, my reflection trembling in its glow, and I began to speak. My voice cracked at first. I apologized for being weak, for sounding broken. Then the words spilled out. The loneliness, the regret, the endless waiting that never ended. I told them of nights when I sat awake, wondering if their childhood promises, "I'll always take care of you, Mama," had been nothing more than fleeting words of children who did not yet understand how cruel the world can be. But woven into my sorrow, something else escaped me. Words I did not plan, phrases heavy with meaning, hints of truths they thought I had never known, secrets they believed buried with time. Perhaps I wanted them to hear it one day. Perhaps it was simply my tired heart loosening its final weight. When I stopped recording, the room felt even quieter than before, as though the silence itself was holding its breath. I sat with the phone in my hand, unsure if I had created a plea for forgiveness, or a confession they were never meant to hear. All I knew was this: I was forgotten. And yet with that single recording, my voice, my pain, my truth, would not be lost in silence. Morning came without ceremony, the gray light pushed through thin curtains, touching Evelyn's still form with a gentleness her children no longer offered. The phone, lying quietly on the small wooden table, contained her final words, unaware of what fate awaited them. Hours later, when a neighbor came knocking and found the apartment silent, the phone was discovered. A trembling hand pressed play, and Evelyn's voice filled the room, haunting and fragile, carrying sorrow deeper than any silence could. It was not long before someone uploaded the recording online. They did not intend harm. In fact, they thought it would be a tribute, a way to honor the truth of an old woman's suffering. Yet what began as a single act of remembrance spread like fire to dry leaves. Within hours, Evelyn's voice traveled across screens, into homes, into hearts. The internet can be cruel, but it can also mourn. And for Evelyn Carter, the world did both. People wept listening to her words. They left comments like prayers. "This broke me. I will call my mother today." How could anyone abandon someone so gentle? Hashtags formed, #RememberEvelyn, #CallYourMother, echoing through social media like a collective confession. Strangers who never knew her shared the video again and again, each share a spark, until her story became ablaze. But grief is never one-sided. Anger quickly followed. Anger at her children. Anger at a family that could walk away from the very woman who had given them life. News outlets caught the wave. Talk shows debated morality and duty. Articles condemned modern neglect of the elderly, plastering Evelyn's fragile image across headlines, the forgotten mother. A last plea for love. Her children's names soon surfaced. Daniel Carter, the successful lawyer. Grace Carter, the refined businesswoman. Michael Carter, the adored schoolteacher. Their accomplishments, once a source of pride, became evidence of hypocrisy. How could such respectable lives be built on the ruins of their mother's abandonment? Reporters hounded them. Cameras flashed. Colleagues whispered. Their polished reputations began to splinter under the public's merciless gaze. Yet for those who watched the video closely, it was not just Evelyn's grief that haunted them. It was the strange phrasing, the cryptic hints she scattered like breadcrumbs in the dark. You never knew the truth of what I gave up. Some betrayals never wash away. Secrets have a way of speaking when the mouth no longer can. These lines drew not just sympathy, but suspicion. The world began to wonder. Had Evelyn intended this message for her children alone? Or had she left behind something far heavier? A final revelation disguised as a mother's lament. Meanwhile, the Carter siblings reeled. They had ignored her calls. They had chosen distance over duty. Now they faced a trial without courtroom walls, judged by millions who only knew Evelyn's trembling voice. Daniel denied. Grace deflected. Michael pleaded misunderstanding. But denial cannot silence the echo of a mother's cry, not when the world has claimed it as its own. And so, Evelyn Carter, forgotten in life, became unforgettable in death. Her face, her voice, her pain lived on the lips of strangers. Her children could not escape it. Not in the streets, not at work, not even in their own homes. What none of them realized, not yet, was that this was only the beginning. The world believed it was mourning a mother. In truth, it was unraveling a story much darker, one Evelyn herself had carefully left behind. The video did more than capture the world's pity. It tore open the lives of Evelyn Carter's children. Within days, the Carter name, once spoken with admiration in their separate circles, became tangled in scandal, shame, and relentless scrutiny. Daniel Carter, the eldest, was perhaps the most visible. A successful lawyer in a prestigious firm, he had spent years carefully polishing his reputation into something untouchable. Now, as he walked into the office, whispers followed him like shadows. Partners stared with pity. Clients canceled meetings. His phone rang with reporters demanding statements, while protesters stood outside the building with placards that read, "Would you abandon your own mother?" Daniel, who once thrived on control, found himself drowning in questions he could not argue his way out of. Grace Carter, elegant and refined, lived in a world of appearances. The image she had crafted, graceful businesswoman, philanthropist, a woman admired for poise, shattered in an instant. Colleagues avoided her gaze. At luncheons, women leaned closer to whisper, their voices dripping judgment. She left her own mother to die. The charities she supported quietly distanced themselves, not wishing to be tied to the scandal of neglect. Grace plastered on smiles in public, but behind closed doors her hands shook as she scrolled through comments online, each word a dagger. Monster. Heartless. Not a daughter, just a name on paper. Michael, the youngest, suffered differently. As a schoolteacher, he had always been adored by parents and children alike. But Evelyn's viral message stained even that safe space. Parents began pulling their children from his class, fearful of the quote, heartless man headlines now tied to his name. In the teacher's lounge, the once warm greetings turned cold. Students, too young to understand fully, whispered behind their hands. He didn't love his mom. Michael, who once believed himself the closest to Evelyn, now carried the heaviest guilt, even as he tried desperately to explain, though no one wanted to hear. The siblings faced more than public judgment. They faced one another. Calls that had once been rare became frantic and angry. Daniel accused Grace of failing to visit. Grace pointed her finger at Michael, the youngest, who had lived closest to Evelyn yet had not checked in for months. Michael, wounded, reminded them both of promises they had all broken. Their words became weapons, sharpened by guilt, hurled across phone lines and conference rooms. At night, none of them slept well. Evelyn's voice haunted them. Her trembling plea, "I only wanted to be remembered," echoed in their minds. The world might have been judging them for neglect, but deep down, they knew the truth was worse. They had indeed forgotten her. Forgotten her warmth, her sacrifices, her quiet strength. Forgotten the woman who had been their anchor. Still, they clung to their defenses. Daniel rehearsed justifications. "She pushed us away." Grace muttered excuses in the dark. "I was too busy. I wanted to, but..." Michael wrote unsent letters to his mother. Pages filled with apologies that came too late. Meanwhile, the press circled like vultures. Every detail of their past was unearthed, dissected, displayed for the world to see. They were no longer children of achievement, they were the children of shame. And though they tried to silence the noise, there was no escape. Not from Evelyn's voice, not from the guilt, and not from the growing suspicion that her message carried something more than grief. That she had left them a puzzle, one the world was already eager to solve. The world had not finished mourning Evelyn Carter when it began dissecting her final words. What most heard first was sorrow, a mother's heartbreak, her loneliness, her plea for love. But the internet is never satisfied with only grief. It searches, it analyzes, it digs until nothing is left untouched. It began with a handful of viewers replaying the recording, writing down Evelyn's sentences word by word. At first, it was simple empathy, but then came the realization that certain lines did not fit seamlessly into her message. They felt heavier, sharper, like jagged pieces in a puzzle. "You never knew the truth of what I gave up. Some betrayals never wash away. Secrets have a way of speaking when the mouth no longer can." These were not ordinary laments of an abandoned mother. They were fragments of something larger. A popular YouTube channel known for decoding mysteries uploaded a video, "The Secret Message in Evelyn Carter's Last Words." The host slowed Evelyn's voice, isolating phrases, connecting dots, speculating. He suggested Evelyn might have hidden confessions in her speech, planting words deliberately, almost like clues. The video went viral overnight. Suddenly, Evelyn was not only a symbol of forgotten parents, she was a mystery to be solved. Forums lit up. Reddit threads grew by the hour. Some believed she was hinting at family betrayals. Others whispered of financial fraud, inheritance disputes, even criminal acts. A few insisted Evelyn's words were not just cryptic but purposeful. Her final act of leaving behind a puzzle for her children, a puzzle the world now felt entitled to solve. Daniel, Grace, and Michael watched in horror as strangers tore apart their private history in public. Online users analyzed old family photos, old addresses, even Evelyn's handwriting and birthday cards that had somehow surfaced. Every scrap of her life became evidence. Every shadow in the Carter family's past was dragged into the light. Daniel dismissed it at first. Ridiculous theories from people with too much time. Yet late at night, he caught himself replaying the recording, hearing, in his mother's words, something he could not ignore. Grace, proud and polished, was the first to panic. She recognized one phrase immediately, something their mother had once whispered to her in a moment of raw disappointment years ago. It chilled her to realize Evelyn had immortalized it in her farewell. Michael, torn between guilt and grief, believed the words were aimed at him, though he could not understand why. The pressure built. News anchors spoke of the hidden code in Evelyn's final message as if it were fact. Podcasts debated its meaning. Scholars and psychologists weighed in, suggesting Evelyn might have been using language intentionally designed to unearth guilt. The Carter siblings, once merely accused of neglect, now faced whispers of something darker. What exactly had their mother known? Inside their own homes, they each sat in silence, staring at the glowing screens that repeated Evelyn's trembling voice. She was everywhere now. On televisions, phones, radios, the pages of newspapers. Her presence was inescapable, her words inescapable. And though the world speculated endlessly, only the three of them knew the truth. Evelyn had known things they had tried to bury, things they never wanted spoken aloud. But Evelyn had spoken them anyway. And she had left the world to wonder whether her message was a confession, a curse, or a calculated act of revenge. Grace Carter had always lived behind glass walls polished to perfection. To the world, she was elegance embodied. The woman who spoke softly but commanded attention, the one whose dresses were tailored, whose smile was calculated, whose life was curated like a gallery. People admired her. Some envied her. Few dared to question her. And yet, Evelyn's last message began to chip away at that glass, exposing cracks Grace thought had long been sealed. It was one line in particular that unsettled her. She had replayed the recording dozens of times, headphones pressed tight against her ears, as if the meaning might change if she listened hard enough. Evelyn's voice, trembling but deliberate, repeated it again and again in her mind. Some betrayals never wash away. To most, it sounded like a mother's lament. But Grace knew better. Those words had been whispered once before. Years ago, in a darkened kitchen, after a heated argument between mother and daughter. Grace had been in her 20s then, standing defiant in front of Evelyn, insisting on her independence, her right to choose her own path even if it meant hurting others. Evelyn, her eyes heavy with disappointment, had murmured that very phrase. It was not loud, not shouted, just whispered, as though she had no strength left for anger. And Grace had never forgotten. Now Evelyn had immortalized those words, spoken them in her final message for the world to hear. To Grace, it felt like exposure, like Evelyn had aimed a finger at her grave and declared her guilty before the millions listening. Grace began to unravel in silence. At work, her hands trembled as she typed emails, her flawless posture slouching when no one was watching. At social events, she forced laughter, though her mind replayed Evelyn's voice beneath every smile. Alone, she sat in her immaculate apartment surrounded by luxury, staring at a single glass of wine she never finished. Her phone buzzed with messages from Daniel and Michael, angry, frantic, desperate to control the narrative, but she ignored most of them. What haunted her more than the public shame was the truth behind Evelyn's words. For Grace had indeed carried a betrayal, one that had gnawed at her in silence for years. She had buried it deep, believing Evelyn had never fully known. But Evelyn had always been sharper than her children believed, her eyes too observant, her silences too heavy. Grace realized now that her mother had known. Perhaps not all of it, but enough to brand it betrayal. She began to suspect the recording was never accidental, that Evelyn, with her frail hands and trembling breath, had spoken with intention, that she had carved her message not only for the world, but for her children's conscience. And Grace, more than the others, felt its blade. Daniel dismissed her fears as paranoia. Michael insisted Evelyn's words were about him, but Grace could not shake the certainty that her mother's voice, echoing across the internet, was aimed squarely at her heart. Every comment online, every headline about hidden codes in Evelyn's message, felt like strangers circling closer to Grace's private truth. And the more she listened, the more she feared Evelyn's betrayal was not just in the past. It was still unfolding, piece by piece, even after her death. The Carter siblings believed the storm might eventually quiet, that people, fickle and forgetful, would move on to another tragedy, another viral sensation. But Evelyn's story refused to fade. Instead, it grew sharper, louder, more invasive, thanks to one man who could not let it go. His name was Nathan Cole, a freelance journalist with a reputation for chasing stories that others deemed too messy, too personal. He was not attached to a major outlet. He thrived on online exposure, on the rush of clicks, on the satisfaction of dragging secrets into the light. To Nathan, Evelyn Carter's last message was not just a heartbreaking viral video, it was a goldmine. He had watched the recording again and again, scribbling notes, dissecting every pause, every tremor in her voice. Where most people saw sorrow, Nathan smelled opportunity. The cryptic lines Evelyn left behind were not just words to him. They were clues, invitations to dig. And Nathan had no qualms about digging where he was not welcome. He began with the public records, marriage licenses, property transfers, old court filings, financial documents. A pattern began to emerge, subtle but undeniable. The Carter family, so outwardly respectable, had shadows in their past. Loans unpaid. A charity donation that never reached its destination. A sudden transfer of property from Evelyn's name to Daniel's years ago. Nathan highlighted every inconsistency, every unanswered question. But facts alone did not satisfy him. He needed voices. He knocked on doors of Evelyn's neighbors, recording their words, She was so lonely, always waiting by the window. Her children rarely visited. I only saw the youngest once, maybe twice a year. The testimonies painted the Carter siblings not just as neglectful, but as cold, heartless, and secretive. Then Nathan did something bolder. He reached out directly to people who had once known the Carters personally, school friends, old colleagues, even distant relatives. Piece by piece, stories surfaced. Arguments between Evelyn and Grace. Financial disputes between Evelyn and Daniel. A falling out Michael never spoke of. Each fragment of gossip became fuel for Nathan's obsession. Finally, Nathan wrote his first exposé. The headline screamed across digital screens. The Carters, a family of secrets behind a mother's cry. It was part journalism, part speculation, and entirely scandalous. He hinted at financial betrayal, questioned the siblings, moral integrity, and suggested Evelyn had intended to expose them from her deathbed. The article spread like wildfire, feeding the hunger of a world already captivated by Evelyn's message. For Daniel, the article was professional ruin. Clients severed ties overnight. For Grace, it was humiliation. The polished mask she had worn for years shattered completely in the public eye. For Michael, it was despair. Parents at his school quoted Nathan's words as if they were gospel, and his career crumbled under suspicion. But Nathan was not finished. He smelled something darker beneath the surface, something even Evelyn's message had only hinted at. In his private notes, he wrote a chilling line. She wanted them punished. This wasn't just a cry, it was revenge, and I'll prove it. For the Carters, the intrusion felt like a violation of their very bloodline. But for Nathan Cole, it was only the beginning. The deeper he dug, the more convinced he became that Evelyn Carter had left behind not just sorrow, but a carefully laid trap. The discovery came almost by accident. Evelyn's apartment, long since cleared and stripped bare, had been left behind like a hollow shell. Boxes of her belongings were stacked in a corner, meant to be divided or discarded by her children. For weeks, they avoided it. To step inside was to face her absence, and none of them were ready for that. But when Nathan Cole, the journalist, pressed for access in his relentless search for answers, the landlord grew impatient. With or without the Carters' consent, Evelyn's belongings were cataloged, and that was when the letters appeared. They were found in an old trunk, tucked beneath blankets yellowed with time. Dozens of envelopes, carefully dated, neatly folded, some sealed, others torn from being read long ago. A lifetime of Evelyn's handwriting filled the fragile pages, looping, sometimes shaky, but always deliberate. When the letters surfaced online, first leaked by Nathan, then spread by countless others, the world leaned closer. Here, in Evelyn's own words, was not just sorrow, but testimony. And for her children, there was no escape. The first letters were simple, tender. Notes to herself, almost like prayers. Today, Daniel won his first case. I wish he'd told me himself, instead of me hearing it from a neighbor. Grace is beautiful tonight. I hope she knows how much I loved buying her that dress, even if it meant skipping meals. Michael promised to visit. I waited by the window all afternoon. I should know better by now. But as the years stretched on, the tone changed. The letters grew heavier, sharper, more aching. Daniel insists the house must be in his name. He says it will protect me, but I know what this is really about. Grace doesn't forgive me for what happened years ago. She doesn't understand the choice I made, the sacrifice. Maybe one day she will. Michael has grown cold. He avoids me. Perhaps he carries guilt I do not know about. The most devastating letter came near the end, her handwriting trembling, ink smudged with what might have been tears. If my children ever read this, I want them to know. I gave up more than they will ever realize. I carried the weight of their sins so they could live free of it. And yet they have left me with mine. I do not know if I can forgive them. Perhaps it is better that the world sees them for who they are. The public devoured every word. Talk shows read the letters aloud as if they were scripture. Strangers wept again, angrier than before. To them, Evelyn had not only been forgotten, she had been betrayed, and her letters painted her children as beneficiaries of her sacrifice. Yet ungrateful. Perhaps even complicit in her suffering. For Daniel, the letters confirmed what he feared. Evelyn had seen through his financial maneuverings. For Grace, the mention of the choice chilled her, dragging back memories she had buried, a decision she thought her mother had never fully understood. For Michael, the words about his guilt twisted the knife deeper, though he could not yet admit what haunted him. The siblings, Anger turned not only toward one another, but toward Nathan Cole, who now wielded their mother's voice and her letters like weapons. They accused him of exploitation. He replied coldly, "The truth cannot be buried. Your mother wanted this seen." And perhaps she had. For in every letter, Evelyn seemed to speak not only to herself, but to someone beyond her death. A witness. A judge. Maybe even the world itself. What the children did not yet realize was that the letters were not the final piece of Evelyn's voice. They were merely the opening act of her deeper revenge. The letters did more than expose Evelyn's private grief. They detonated a mine buried in the Carter family's foundation. Whatever fragile unity the siblings had clung to in the wake of the viral storm crumbled under the weight of their mother's words. They had been accused by strangers, shamed by the world. But it was Evelyn's hand, steady even in frailty, that finally turned them against each other. The confrontation began in Daniel's apartment. He had insisted they meet in person. No more frantic phone calls, no more messages drowned in panic. Grace arrived first, tight-lipped, dressed in black as though mourning an image rather than a mother. Michael came late, disheveled, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. Nathan's articles and Evelyn's letters had poisoned their lives beyond repair, and now they were face to face, each one bracing for battle. Daniel was the first to strike. "She wrote that I took the house for myself. That's what the public believes now. Do you have any idea what that's done to my career, to my reputation?" His voice was sharp, his fingers stabbing the air as if pointing at an invisible jury. Grace scoffed, her voice cool but trembling underneath. "Your reputation? That's all you care about? She died alone, Daniel. And you think the world owes you sympathy because a few clients left." Michael, slumped in the corner chair, muttered. "She mentioned me too. Said I was guilty of something. Everyone keeps asking me what she meant. I don't even know what she meant." His voice cracked, and for a moment he sounded like the boy who once clung to Evelyn's hand, terrified of being left in the dark. Grace turned on him, her restraint breaking. "Maybe she meant you because you lived closest. You were the one who could have gone to her. You had no excuse, none. And yet she sat alone for weeks while you played the good teacher." Michael flinched, anger rushing to the surface. "Don't you dare put this all on me! You!" He jabbed a finger toward Grace. "You betrayed her. We all know it. That line in her message? That was for you. Not me. Not Daniel. You." The air crackled with the word. Betrayal. Grace's mask faltered, just for a second, before she straightened, her chin lifting in defiance. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Daniel, always the prosecutor, seized on her hesitation. "He's right. That line was about you. Mother saw through you years ago. And she made sure the world would see it too." Grace's composure shattered. Her voice rose, raw and sharp. "And what about you, Daniel? You used her. You drained her, made her sign over everything, while pretending it was for her safety. Don't you dare stand there like you're innocent." They were shouting now, words tumbling over one another, accusations sharper than knives. Childhood resentment spilled out, slights remembered, wounds never healed. The forgotten birthdays, the favoritism, the constant competition for Evelyn's approval. Every buried hurt rose to the surface, until the room echoed with years of bitterness. Michael, trembling, slammed his fist against the table. "Stop it! Stop pretending any of us loved her the way she deserved. We left her. All of us. And now she's haunting us from the grave because that's the only way she could make us listen." His voice broke on the last word, and silence fell heavy in its wake. For a moment, no one moved. They stood in the ruins of their family bond, glaring at one another, knowing nothing would ever be the same. Evelyn's message had not only shamed them, it had turned them into enemies. And yet, deep inside, each of them wondered the same thing. If Evelyn had been capable of planning such a message, what else had she left behind? The Carters thought they had seen the worst of it. The video. The letters. The endless judgment of strangers. They believed the storm had reached its peak, that the noise would eventually dull into background static. But Evelyn Carter had one more voice left to unleash, and it was the one they feared most. It began quietly, as such things always do. A small leak on an obscure forum, posted by someone who claimed to have access to the full recording, the part of Evelyn's final message that had never been released. At first, it seemed unbelievable. A desperate hoax. But within hours, the clip was verified, and by evening it spread across every platform, every screen, every ear. The world that had once wept for Evelyn now fell silent to listen. Her voice returned, quieter, more fragile than before. The first moments of the unreleased section sounded like a prayer, broken breaths strung together. But then her tone shifted, sharpening with the clarity of someone who knew she was leaving behind, not just grief, but judgment. "I carried your sins," she said. "I bore them because I thought that was what a mother does. But you, my children, you carried none of mine. You left me with them, heavy, unbearable. And so I speak them now, not for me, but for the world that will outlive me." The next words were devastating. Evelyn named them Daniel, Grace, Michael, her voice shaking but unmistakable. "Daniel, you took what was mine and called it protection. You made me sign papers I never wanted to sign, and in doing so, you robbed me of the only security I had left," the world gasped. Daniel, watching the leak from his office, felt his chest tighten as the ground beneath his life cracked open. Then came Grace. Evelyn's voice grew colder. "Grace, my beautiful girl, you betrayed not just me but yourself. You chose a path I could not forgive, one that left scars you thought I never saw. But I did. I saw it all. And I carried your shame in silence, because you could not bear to carry it yourself." Grace dropped her phone when she heard it. Her hands shook, her throat closed. She had lived her entire life fearing Evelyn's disapproval. And now, years later, her mother had spoken the very words she had dreaded most, before the entire world. And then Michael. Evelyn's voice softened, almost mournful. "My baby, you promised me you would stay close, that you would not forget me. But you did. You turned away because you feared the truth you carried inside yourself. You thought I did not know. But a mother always knows." Michael fell into his chair, pale and trembling. He wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that she didn't know, but the weight of her words told him otherwise. She had always known. The recording ended with Evelyn's final chilling line. "Let the world see you as I have seen you. Let them judge you as you judged me, with silence, with distance, with coldness. This is my truth, and now it is yours to bear." The fallout was immediate. News outlets erupted. Social media exploded. Strangers who had once wept for Evelyn now turned their wrath into open condemnation of her children. Daniel was accused of theft, Grace of betrayal, Michael of cowardice. Each of them was branded not just neglectful, but corrupted by secrets their mother had dragged into the light. But beyond the noise of headlines and hashtags, there was something far worse. The realization, buried deep in each of their hearts, that Evelyn had orchestrated everything. Her viral message, her letters, this final revelation. She had not spoken by accident. She had planned her revenge, step by step, leaving behind a legacy that could not be silenced. For the Carters, there was no hiding anymore. The world knew. And worse still, Evelyn knew. Even in death, she was watching. By the time Evelyn Carter's final words echoed across the world, her children were no longer people. They were symbols. Strangers spat their names like curses. Their faces were plastered across television screens, their reputations dismantled, their lives stripped bare. The Carter family, once private and respectable, had become a spectacle of disgrace. But beneath the noise of scandal, one question grew louder, gnawing at everyone who listened. Did Evelyn plan this, or had it all unfolded by cruel chance? For Daniel, the aftermath was professional ruin. Clients abandoned him. His firm, desperate to salvage its own image, forced him out. He stared at the papers his mother had accused him of forging protection from, and for the first time he wondered if he had convinced himself of his own lies. Maybe he had taken more than she'd ever given. Grace withdrew into silence, shutting her curtains, avoiding mirrors. The world speculated endlessly about her betrayal, but the truth was hers alone, and Evelyn's. She could not escape the memory of her mother's disappointed whisper from years ago, now immortalized for the world to hear. It was as if Evelyn had reached from the grave to strip Grace of every layer of dignity she had fought to build. Michael, once beloved by children and parents alike, found himself adrift. The school dismissed him quietly. Friends stopped calling. In the dark of his apartment, he replayed Evelyn's words until he felt her presence pressing in around him. A mother always knows. He cried not only for her loss, but for the weight of his own guilt. A truth he had buried so deep, he had almost believed he could escape it. But Evelyn had dug it back up, without ever leaving her chair. The siblings tried, briefly, to unite again, to silence the storm with statements, interviews, denials. But it was futile. Every time they spoke, Evelyn's voice drowned them out. The video, the letters, the final revelation. They were played and replayed, stitched into montages, carved into headlines. Evelyn Carter was no longer simply their mother. She was a martyr, a warning, a ghost who refused to rest. And still, the question lingered. Was it intentional? Nathan Cole, the journalist who had chased her story to the end, claimed it was. In interviews, he described Evelyn as meticulous, calculating. She knew what she was doing, he told the world. That message was no accident. She wanted them exposed. She wanted the world to see them as she did. He pointed to the way her words aligned, the cryptic hints scattered deliberately. To him, Evelyn's revenge was deliberate and brilliant. But others disagreed. Psychologists argued it was the rambling sorrow of a dying woman, strung together without meaning, given weight only by the guilt of those who survived her. She did not plan revenge, one expert declared. She planned remembrance. The rest is projection. The debate raged on, and the Carters themselves could never answer it. Because deep down, each of them believed something different. Daniel thought Evelyn had condemned him deliberately. Grace felt she had been marked, singled out. Michael, broken and haunted, believed she had left him her silence long before her words ever reached the world. And so Evelyn Carter remained suspended in ambiguity, saint to some, villain to others, ghost to her children. Her apartment stood empty now, yet those who passed it swore the windows still seemed to watch. Her video continued to resurface, years later, shared by strangers who whispered her words as if they were prophecy. Perhaps it had been revenge. Perhaps it had only been sorrow. But whatever it was, Evelyn had achieved the one thing her children never gave her in life. She would never, ever be forgotten.